This is one of those moments that is not a split screen in different information universes. The former Secretary of State, a candidate who got more votes than Donald Trump in 2016, but of course lost in the Electoral College, a person who had disclaimed, and there's no evidence to suggest she has personal knowledge in the Epstein matter, but Republicans brought her in for only the way they can explain. And when she came out to speak, I'm going to show you a little bit of what she said tonight. This was covered across all of the news channels, not just one or the other. And obviously Hillary Clinton is a person in American life where everyone can look up and go, oh, what is she saying tonight? Well, here is some of what she said coming out of that Epstein private hearing.
I never met Jeffrey Epstein, never had any connection or communication with him. I knew Ghislaine Maxwell casually as an acquaintance. But whatever they asked me, I did my very best to respond.
What you just heard was a direct response after a closed-door Epstein-related hearing, a moment that immediately commanded national attention because when a former Secretary of State steps forward to address questions tied to one of the most controversial criminal cases in modern history, the political world pauses. She made her position clear, a categorical denial of any personal involvement, and a statement that she complied fully with the process. She showed up, she answered questions, she participated in the hearing, but what stood out just as much was her description of how the questioning unfolded. According to her, the conversation veered into topics far outside the core issue, including UFOs and the long-debunked Pizzagate conspiracy theory. That detail speaks volumes about the current political climate. Serious investigations, partisan maneuvering, and internet-driven conspiracies now often exist in the same arena, and that overlap shapes how the public interprets events. But while that hearing dominated headlines, a far more consequential institutional development was taking place elsewhere. Donald Trump had just received a significant ruling from the United States Supreme Court, a decision that directly addresses the limits of presidential authority.
The former Secretary of State saying that she showed up, she has her objections, but unlike so many people who are not perhaps serious about subpoenas or the rule of law or other government rules and laws, she says, okay, I showed up. She's been very critical, though, and released a public opening statement in writing where we could see some of her.
At the end, quite unusual because I started being asked about UFOs and a series of questions about Pizzagate, one of the most vile, bogus conspiracy theories that was propagated on the internet.
The court ruled 6-3 that the administration exceeded its authority in imposing sweeping global tariffs under emergency powers. This was not a narrow procedural setback. It was a firm statement that emergency authority does not equal unlimited authority. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act was at the center of the dispute. The administration argued that economic conditions justified broad action. The court disagreed, concluding that Congress had not clearly authorized the scale of tariffs imposed. That distinction matters because this case is not just about trade policy. It is about constitutional structure. Presidents have significant power, but that power operates within boundaries set by Congress and interpreted by the courts. Emergency declarations can expand executive flexibility, but they are not blank checks. And this ruling reinforces that principle. The immediate impact is practical. The tariff framework, as constructed, cannot stand in its current form. There may be financial consequences, there may be further litigation, but the broader impact is institutional. A clear boundary has been drawn. Now place that decision into a wider political context. Donald Trump has publicly acknowledged that losing political power would expose him to serious legal challenges. He has spoken about investigations. He has referenced potential prosecutions. So when the Supreme Court asserts limits, the stakes are not abstract. They intersect with personal vulnerability. In this framework, political power is not merely about policy. It is also perceived as protection. And when courts demonstrate that executive authority has constraints, that perception shifts. At the same time, the memory of a real security threat remains part of the background. An assassination attempt is not something a public figure simply forgets. Security protocols change. Public appearances feel different. Risk calculations become constant. Even after the legal case concludes, the psychological impact remains. So what we are witnessing is a convergence of pressures, judicial limitation, ongoing political polarization, heightened personal security awareness. When those factors combine, they influence rhetoric, they influence tone, they influence strategic choices. Supporters interpret institutional pushback as political resistance. Critics interpret it as constitutional accountability. Independent observers often focus on stability and precedent. And that is what makes this moment significant, because it is larger than tariffs. It is larger than a single hearing. It reflects an ongoing tension between executive ambition and constitutional guardrails. The 6-3 ruling will likely be cited in future challenges involving emergency authority. It becomes part of the legal framework defining the outer limits of presidential power. Politically, such rulings reshape narrative momentum. Leadership is not only about policy outcomes, it is also about perception, about control, about direction, about authority. A high-profile judicial defeat interrupts that narrative. An interruption invites recalibration. The critical question now is how strategy adjusts. Does policy narrow to align more carefully with statutory language? Does confrontation intensify? Does legislative negotiation become necessary? Institutional pushback can either moderate action or escalate tension. The direction chosen will shape the next phase of political discourse. At its core, this moment is about balance, the balance between branches of government, the balance between urgency and authorization, the balance between power and accountability. When that balance is tested, institutions either bend or they hold. In this instance, the judiciary has signaled that it intends to hold. What happens next depends not just on the ruling itself, but on the response to it.